Just recently, 8-year-old Han is one of the last children scheduled to be picked up from school that day. When the adult comes to sign her out of the after-school program, she's told to head down the stairs toward the main entrance. Han does this every weekday, Monday through Friday. It's not some new route. It's her usual routine. The teacher from the academy who's waiting for her stands at the front desk. 1 minute, 2, 5. Now that's starting to feel strange. Maybe she stopped at the restroom. Maybe she forgot a textbook in another classroom. The teacher waits another 10 minutes, and that's when all hell breaks loose, because an 8-year-old child can't just vanish in 10 minutes inside a school. Is that even possible? There are practically no entrances or exits that aren't being monitored. Even if Han had run out, she left her outdoor shoes behind, meaning she would have fled in just her indoor shoes alone. And even if she did run out, someone would have seen her in the courtyard or in the parking lot. You'd have to pass through them, but no one saw her at all. The teachers and all the staff are put on full alert. 8-year-old Han is missing. They get to the teacher she was last with, and she's completely bewildered. Listen, I was just with her. You're the one who called for her to be released from the after-school program. I sent her downstairs. The staircase is right around the corner from the front desk, but she wasn't there. And how does this work? The reception desk calls the classroom. Release this particular child. Someone has come to pick them up. From there, the child walks down from the second floor on their own to the main entrance, and that's where they're picked up. Makes sense. 10 minutes pass, and she's gone. They start checking everything. Classrooms, under desks, the teacher's lounge, the cafeteria, the restrooms, but she's not there either. And it just doesn't add up. Because how could she have left the building without a single person noticing? By 5:30 in the evening, the entire neighborhood had been mobilized. Police cars and ambulances surround the school. Neighbors stand out on the street in their thick down jackets. It's snowing. Everyone has red eyes, their hands red from the wind. Everyone huddled close together. And if you just stood there and turned a full 360 degrees around, you'd see massive residential complexes surrounding this school. Thousands upon thousands of apartments, and Han could be in any one of them. And the geolocation on her phone shows she's somewhere in this area, meaning either she's still inside the school, or she was lured into one of the apartments, or she was put into a vehicle. No one knows. And there are quite a few possible scenarios. The authorities are running around, the relatives are all searching too, and only at 6 p.m. does an ambulance bring 2 people at once to the hospital. The pickup was at 4:40. An hour and 20 minutes had passed. 8-year-old Han and a 48-year-old woman, a school teacher, both with stab injuries. They're rushed straight to intensive care. No one explains anything to the doctors. They don't need it. They just do their job. Han doesn't make it. Naturally, she can't withstand something like this, but the 48-year-old teacher will live. And she's fine. And there's this eerie feeling. The nurses are probably running scenarios through their heads. Maybe he broke into the school, targeting children. Maybe he was responsible for the deaths of both Han and the teacher who was shielding her. Or he was attacking the teacher, and the children just got caught in it. Or he wanted to get them all at once. And now, how do you tell this woman when she comes to that her student didn't survive? But when the teacher regains consciousness, all those worries vanish in an instant, because she starts to laugh. Literally laugh, because she did it, and it seems this is exactly what she wanted. She wanted to take the life of this 8-year-old girl, and right now she seems quite satisfied that she pulled it off, and this is the current Han case in South Korea, February 2025, and one app goes viral. I mean, massively. It feels like every other person and their mother is downloading it. It's not TikTok, it's actually a pretty controversial thing. People are openly arguing whether it's ethical or not. Are we promoting stalking now? Since when did surveillance and invasion of privacy become a norm that everyone accepted? This app has a few features that make people's hair stand on end. First, it tracks not only your real-time location, but every single place your phone has been over the past 24 hours, meaning after the fact. Someone can log in and see, at 2:30 p.m. you were at the doctor's, and all day you've been running around handling things. Someone else sees this, not you. Say you're swamped with stuff, your phone is on silent, you don't hear your best friend or someone close to you calling. They just press a button, and your alarm goes off right through the silent mode so that you and everyone around you definitely hear that underscore underscore quote underscore zero underscore underscore. Sure, it's convenient but somehow very intrusive. And the app also monitors which apps you're using. And the most interesting feature is called underscore underscore quote underscore one underscore underscore cute, right? But in reality, many users say it's actually one of the creepiest things this app can do. It's like live listening. I'm the account holder. I have phone A. Well, this is me, for example, and you have phone B. And at any moment, I can tap the little ear icon in the app and I'll hear everything your microphone picks up. 1,000 meters away from me, even 1,000 kilometers. If your phone is in a cafe, I'll hear all of it. And it's obvious that if the phone is in your jeans pocket, it'll be muffled. But if it's lying on the table, I can calmly listen in on the conversation. And in general, in cafes, is that even legal or what? Well, let's forget about the personal stuff. Imagine you're at a private party and someone is quietly listening to you. It's precisely because parents have all the rights. It's a phone, and the parent owns it, and they listen to their children, at school, in cafes, at after-school programs, anywhere. But I understand why it's called a stalker app. And in Korea, in February of 2025, parents are downloading it en masse. And Han's dad, his name is Kim, installed this app on her phone several months earlier. And Han didn't know about it, she didn't know it was on her phone, but she's 8. And here's where there's an interesting debate. Which parenting methods are controversial, especially with teenagers? When a child turns 13 or 14, they need personal space. But an 8-year-old, well, here the arguments vary. Some will say even an 8-year-old should have personal space. Not a lot, but definitely some. There shouldn't be a feeling that you're constantly being listened to. Well, in Korea, they have their own logic about this. There they say, with us it's different. School, the school bus picks them up, then you stop by after work and pick them up. Then you take them somewhere else. The parent's whole life is on wheels. But in Korea, you can see an 8-year-old riding the subway by themselves, alone. So they say that for Korean kids, such an app is really more necessary. Well, here, most likely, yes. You can argue about it endlessly because Han is 8, and most likely she wouldn't have cared whether the app was on her phone or not. And her parents always knew where she was. She was always in the same places: school, after-school care. Hagwon is like a second school, an additional academy, then home. And it's like this 5 days a week, except for Monday, February 10th, 2025. Classes end around 2, then after-school care until 4:40, almost 3 hours to do homework to prepare for the academy classes. Then the teacher from the academy comes, picks up children from different schools, and takes them to class. They have new lessons there at 5. That is, at 5, lessons again. Interesting, right? Well, fine. This isn't some special schedule of Han's. This is basically the typical day of any 8-year-old in South Korea. And there's wild competition for jobs there, and they prepare for this race from age 5. Han is waiting for the teacher from Hagwon. She's sitting in after-school care. Only these 3 hours after class aren't really lessons anymore. Transitional time, you're not actively studying, you're doing homework and sitting there until 4:40. And Han is almost always one of the last ones picked up, just because of the academy's schedule. And on that Monday, they tell her, come downstairs, someone's here to pick you up. But this time, she simply vanishes. The teacher sees Han walk out of the classroom, and that's it. 10 minutes later, everyone's asking where she is. What do you mean? She already left. I let her go. Those are the teacher's words. They call Han's parents. They're in a panic. What do you mean she's missing? Han's grandmother lives closer to the school. She runs there first. And when Dad Kim arrives at the school, he immediately understands that this isn't normal. Several police officers are already on the scene helping with the search, and Kim tells them clearly, this isn't like my daughter. She wouldn't snap. She's not burned out. She's not under stress. This is definitely not her. The main fear, that she was lured somewhere into one of the thousands of apartments around the school. It doesn't add up, because someone would have definitely seen something, and that's when Kim opens that parental app. Han's location shows she's somewhere here, but it can't pinpoint more precisely, meaning either she's in the school or in one of the 10 nearest residential buildings. Kim dials Han, she doesn't answer. Then he hits the live listen feature, and if Han is near her phone, he'll hear everything. He's standing out in the cold, trying to move away from the shouting and the chaos, to listen and listen. And the first thing, I realized the sounds weren't coming from the street, she's inside. The phone is somewhere inside a building. This isn't outside, there are no car sounds, no wind, no background noise at all, and she's silent. So, from these fragments, he understands that someone is there near her, and that someone is breathing heavily. He knows for certain that this isn't Han. You might say that breathing sounds the same for everyone. An 8-year-old and a 40-year-old both run a marathon. Both will be breathing heavily at the finish, but they'll sound different. It's anatomy. With age, the muscles of the airways and the cartilage become less elastic, and when an adult catches their breath, the airflow becomes more turbulent, meaning there's a medical explanation for why heavy breathing in people of different ages sounds different. Guttural sounds that, in principle, simply cannot be produced by the vocal cords of an 8-year-old child. And Kim hears this. Whoever is breathing heavily, it's not Han. It sounds like the breathing of a middle-aged person who has just been running and is winded. And how can this be? Why is someone standing next to his daughter gasping for air? And why are they holding her phone? And one more thing. You can hear someone opening and closing a drawer. You know how you have a desk, and you quickly open and close the drawers. Like several drawers in a row, opened, closed, opened, as if a person is frantically searching for something. And Kim stands frozen in the middle of this chaos. Police, cars, officers, neighbors, teachers, everyone shouting Han's name. And he hears this heavy breathing. He lowers the phone, presses the alarm button. If Han's phone is somewhere nearby, everyone will hear the loud alarm sound. He turns the alarm off. Someone unzips Han's backpack, jabs at her phone, meaning he literally hears someone tapping on it to make it stop. For a whole hour, Kim listens to this while simultaneously searching for his daughter himself. But it won't be him who finds her. It'll be the grandmother. Grandma Kim is already going around the school for the 10th time, floor by floor, every classroom, with other staff members. Many of the officers don't even believe Han is in the school. They figure, stress, maybe she doesn't want to go to the academy, though that doesn't add up at all, but the idea that she's in the school doesn't add up either. There's basically nowhere to hide. Grandma doesn't know what to do. She's walked every floor 10 times. She's not going to break into other people's apartments. Have you seen my 8-year-old in the neighborhood? So she puts her energy into what's within her power, and once again the second floor. That's where Han was last seen, and right here is where she vanished. Grandma walks the floor again. She's already turning toward the stairwell to head back down. And then, a small door. And the door had been there the whole time. But just now, it caught her eye. It's an audio-video room. Every school has one, usually soundproofed, no windows. Sometimes there are windows, but the curtains are heavy. Blackout. Kids go in there when they need to watch a presentation on a projector, or an educational video, not like a regular classroom with a pull-down screen. They go in there specifically. The room is almost always locked, because the last thing you want is for some troublemaker to hook up to the speakers and put on a concert of profanity or music. But something's off about this room. And Grandma reaches for the handle, turns it, and the door opens. She pushes it wide open. It's dark inside. The curtains are drawn, but light from the hallway falls in, and no one is visible. No overturned desks? Maybe intuition? Maybe just thoroughness? A small door inside. Probably a storage closet for equipment. She walks toward it, opens it. She can't find the switch quickly, and the light from the hallway is barely seeping in now. It's only open a crack at this point. Grandma pulls out her phone, turns on the flashlight, and the first thing she sees, feet. Large, adult feet. Someone's on the floor. And there's a woman lying there, an adult. The grandmother raises the phone higher, her face covered in what appears to be blood. And naturally, she's horrified, almost drops the phone. Her body is screaming, "Get out, it's dangerous," but she's forced to ask calmly, "Have you seen my granddaughter?" No. Wait, she's conscious, and the grandmother runs out of the storage room, out of the audio-video classroom into the hallway, calls the father, calls the police, stands guard at the door because she senses something is very wrong in there. But Kim already knows when he picks up. He just heard his mother's voice through the app. At the end, he suddenly hears, quote, 3. The strangest part. This woman looked frightened. She didn't call for help, didn't say, quote, 4, quote, nothing like that at all. Just hadn't seen the granddaughter, that's it. And what kind of question is that to even ask? Later, the grandmother would say the blood on her wasn't her own. She didn't look injured. She looked like someone who had been doused in someone else's blood. And within a few minutes, the police and Han's father surround the second floor, the storage room, which the grandmother had just opened and seen that woman inside. And this very door, which is now locked from the inside. Who is this woman the grandmother just saw? Every school has its own ghost story, the spirit of a student who once fell from the roof, now wandering the locker rooms. The school was built on a cemetery, and screams can be heard from the showers in the gym because there were graves there. After sunset, no one stays on the grounds. But that's classic stuff. The kids say this is genuinely strange. It's not like she was threatening anyone with that knife, not waving it around, just constantly clicking it. The blade out, in, that sound, constantly. Is this an urban legend, or is this really about a teacher? Well, this is about a real teacher, one the kids at this specific school talked about exactly like that. And they say she's not a ghost from a story. She herself is like a ghost. In Korea, schools aren't set up like in America. It's not, "Hi, Mrs. Smith." You have to bow to every teacher, it's mandatory. And many students bow to her and she just stares at you with an empty gaze, as if right through you, like she really is a ghost. And this utility knife, the blade going in and out, and sometimes she walks around with a roll of blue painter's tape, you know, the blue kind. No one understands what she's doing with it. She just walks around holding this little roll in her hand. The kids complain at home that she brings in a long stick, the kind usually used for the chalkboard, and slams it on her podium hard, really hard. Parents try to talk sense into their children, but maybe she's just trying to get attention, to make sure everyone's focused, and the kids aren't. She's waving them so hard that the air practically whistles around her, and that's just not normal. And the kids are saying, "I heard she broke a computer in the teacher's lounge. Something is genuinely off about her." But the parents think, "Oh, those are just kid rumors." And the strangest part? If she used to be one of the best teachers in the school, that's exactly why she became the local boogeyman, as if one day she came to work. But inside it wasn't her anymore. It was someone else. From the kindest, the best, the one who used to treat the kids to little snacks, who never made them feel stupid for asking silly questions, to a ghost in the hallways. And one student says, "I don't know. She was so sweet, so polite. I don't understand what happened to her." And meanwhile, officers were already approaching the locked storage room door. They kick at it about 20 times before it finally gives way. They burst in, turn on the light, and see that very same woman the grandmother had been talking about. Around 40 years old, lying on the floor with no strength left, and right beside her a tiny figure covered in injuries. It's Hannah, of course. She had been placed deeper inside the storage room, which is why the grandmother hadn't seen her. They're both lying on their backs, their heads pointed in the same direction. Hannah has injuries all over. She was struck with a sharp object dozens of times in the neck, the arms, the chest, the back. You can clearly see defensive wounds on her hands. She was trying to shield herself from the weapon with her arms. And the teacher has a self-inflicted wound on her neck. They're both rushed straight to the hospital. An hour and a half had passed since the moment Hannah disappeared. 8-year-old Hannah was attacked with a sharp object by a teacher from her own school. In the intensive care unit, the teacher is on a ventilator. She's not allowed anything, not even water. And the very second her condition stabilizes, they remove the tubes. And she laughs. That's what every doctor and nurse writes in their reports. The entire ward freezes. What is she laughing at? By this point, everyone already knows what happened. The laughter, and they rush in with the questioning. Nothing adds up. What happened is clear. But what next? The teacher teaches second grade at this school. She isn't even Hannah's teacher. She isn't the after-school program teacher Hannah had been with that day, and it appears this teacher had no contact with her at all. Why did she do it? No connection whatsoever. It's not like Hannah was a difficult child. That wouldn't be a justification anyway, of course. But there wasn't even that. They barely crossed paths. And when the teacher calms down after her laughter, she tells the investigators, "It didn't matter which child it was. I didn't care. I just didn't want to die alone. So I told the child who was leaving the after-school program, 'I'll give you a book, you need to read it,' and I led her into the audio-video classroom. And there she strangled her and caused fatal harm. She didn't care which child she took with her. She simply didn't want to die alone. And within just a few hours, this case became one of the top stories everywhere in South Korean news and in international news as well. The BBC wrote that a teacher had taken the life of an 8-year-old. CBS News, this is a Korean channel, reported that a teacher had taken the life of an 8-year-old elementary school student in South Korea. CNN reported that a teacher was being accused of being responsible for the death of a first grader, and that the attack at the school had shocked South Korea. No one knows who she is. All that's known is that she's 48, and she worked at this school. That's it. Her identity isn't being disclosed. And naturally, the public begins to demand answers. People should have the right to know who did this. And Koreans write in the comments, her personal information should be published. Her identity shouldn't remain hidden, especially since there was confusion at the beginning. Before the police officially confirmed that the teacher had regained consciousness and confessed, people on the internet couldn't wrap their heads around how someone could do this to an 8-year-old and began putting forward theories. Maybe there was a third party, maybe a predator who wasn't caught and is still in the school. But as soon as the teacher more or less confirmed that she was the one who did it, the demand started to disclose her information naturally. And neighbors and parents are saying, "You're actually doing more harm than good by not publishing her name." And people start pointing fingers at random teachers. Maybe it's this one, maybe that one. That's how it used to work, just at random. Naturally, innocent people suffer, and in Korea, the law also works in its own way. There's a committee of 7 people, they evaluate aggravating circumstances, and they make the decision whether or not to reveal the name. And even after that, not always. They have to inform the accused herself, tell her, "You can appeal our decision," or "We publish," and she immediately gives consent. She agreed, yes, and a whole month after the fatal incident, they finally release it. It's a 48-year-old teacher with the surname Moon. They publish 2 photographs, both her work photo for the school and shots from the station. In the work photo, she looks completely ordinary. You could even say she's an attractive woman, looks younger than her years, a chin-length bob, side-swept bangs, a normal, pleasant face. Koreans have this thing called insang. It's the first impression you get of a person from their face, from how they present themselves. She doesn't have angry eyebrows, doesn't have any suspicious eyes. These are, of course, very subjective assessments, but in Korea, people really obsess over this. And overall, her insang is pleasant. She seems kind, and this shocked many Koreans. In the comments, people wrote, "If I had met her on the street and she had asked for help, I would have helped. And if she had been a teacher at our school, I would have followed her into any room." For context, in Korean culture, first impressions are extremely important. When you meet someone, you don't only judge what the person says, you read their aura, their face, how they're dressed, and whether their insang is good or bad. Whether they might be a soft girl or a tough, stubborn one, a cheerful one, a willful one. It's just a general impression in Korean culture. And it's believed that a person's face contributes its own share to that impression. And when people saw her, when they found out it was actually her who did this, that was a whole separate conversation. Everyone expected to see a photo of a mean, nasty teacher with a face that said, "I hate kids, I came to work." But here she looks ordinary, pleasant, and that's deeply frightening because, of course, Han went along with her. First, she's an authority figure, and second, school is considered a safe zone. Especially in Korea, where parents send their child to school and place enormous trust in teachers. And she looks very kind. Some people say, "No, look at her photos from the police station, she looks sinister." Others reply, "Yes, she looks sinister because she did something sinister, But if you photographed any ordinary person on a rear camera right after waking up without washing their face, everyone would look like those photos. And as people ironically point out, that's how society is built. Everyone is only interested in her face. And what do we even know about her? She has a son who is taking college entrance exams this year. She recently got divorced. And that's it. That's all that's known about her. Naturally, neighbors are searching for any clue. Maybe her digital footprint will reveal something, that she was disturbed from the very beginning. But all they found was the dissertation she wrote during her master's program. In it, she writes about transitioning to individualized learning instead of a unified curriculum, so that children can learn on their own at their own pace. And she quotes the saying, quote 7, she agrees with it, meaning teachers must grow, be on the front lines, provide quality education. Maybe she actually believed this at some point, but she definitely doesn't now. Around 17, 15th, an ordinary Thursday, one of the teachers at this school, let's call her Mrs. A, comes rushing out of a classroom, one hand clutching her throat, the other leaning against the wall. She runs forward, stops to cough. It's not a light cough. It's like she's choking, can't catch her breath. None of the teachers have left yet. They're working on lesson plans, and her face is bright red. She gasps out, "Mrs. Mann! Mrs. Mann!" And they're like, "What? What happened?" Mrs. A tells them, "I was leaving the school and I saw her. She was sitting in the dark in some random empty classroom, crouched in the center. I'd noticed lately she hasn't been herself at all. I opened the door, went in, and there she is, sitting completely motionless. Really creepy. So she walked closer, asked, 'Man, are you okay?' And then suddenly, Man reaches out, grabs her left arm, twists it behind her back like a professional wrestler. Mrs. A's arm is pinned behind her, excruciatingly painful. She's dragged to the floor. Man grabs her by the collar of her puffer jacket and starts strangling her with her own collar. Mrs. A is in panic, coughing, trying to scream. She's being strangled out of nowhere for no reason at all. Mrs. A has one free hand. She tries to claw Man's fingers off her neck, thinking fast, while not trying to provoke her further. She tries to talk to her. "Tell me what's happening. What happened? Talk to me. Are you okay?" And Man, in a completely empty voice, says, "Why am I the only one who has to be miserable? Excuse me. What? This is literally attempted homicide." And then a sound. Mrs. A looks over. Man's phone is vibrating on the desk. Mrs. A tries to gesture. "You need to answer. Maybe it's your husband calling? Answer it." Man's like, "Husband, we got divorced. I go home, there's no one there, I'm completely alone." The teacher immediately reports it to the school administration. This is Thursday, and the administration decides, we'll talk to Mrs. Mann on Monday. Clearly, Mrs. Mann is not ready to be working. She was supposed to be on medical leave for 6 months, but she came back after 20 days. And now, just a few days later, she tried to strangle a colleague. Generally speaking, of all the teachers, she had the most patience with the children and 20 years of teaching experience. She knows how to conduct herself, how to control her emotions. Over the years, she received many awards, and no complaints from parents or colleagues. From medical records, it's known that she had been battling severe depression for 5 years, and so in December 2024, the school and Mann herself reached an agreement. She would go on medical leave for 6 months and undergo treatment. Everyone was on board. The patient required a minimum of 6 months for stable treatment. This was severe depression, complete exhaustion. But after 20 days, right before winter break, she suddenly returns. Everyone is shocked. Her position had already been filled by someone else, and she says, 6 months isn't necessary, that was enough for me. How did I need 6 months turn into everything's back to normal in just 20 days? The symptoms of depression had improved over these 20 days. I can return to my regular work, and here's your medical clearance. Everything's fine. This in itself is already a warning sign, considering that in Korea, winter break runs roughly from mid to late December until the end of January. So Mann returns right before break and chokes a colleague on February 6th. That means it's already 1 to 2 weeks after the break. And that's when the children started saying that something was wrong with their teacher. Everyone could see it, but they pretended nothing was happening because she wasn't threatening anyone. She wasn't yelling, wasn't having outbursts. She was just somehow unstable. But it was as if it would be hard to judge her for it, hard to even put it into words. And here's the catch. The children noticed and said something, but adults just brush it off, oh, kids are blowing things out of proportion. Although in this case, the children were right, and you really do need to listen in situations like this. Then she actually choked a colleague on February 6th. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, nothing happens, and then on Monday. Man, very gently, it must be said, considering that she had tried to choke a colleague, they gently suggest she finish out her medical leave, not stay at the school, and go see a doctor. And that same day, man takes the life of this little girl, meaning the teacher had tried to take the life of another person, and nothing followed immediately. That's exactly why so many people are outraged about this case. There were so many warning signs. After classes, that Monday the 10th, as usual, she goes to the after-school program on the second floor. That's her regular schedule. She waits there from 2 p.m. until 4:40. Teachers from the academy are supposed to pick her up. They then drive the kids to different schools. And during this window, Han's grandmother thought, I'll pick up my granddaughter a little early as a surprise, feed her at home, and then bring her back to the academy. But Han texted her, no need. Everything's fine. I don't want to be a burden. And here's where the teachers all seem so kind. At one point, Han wrote, it's just me and the after-school teacher left now. All the other children have gone home, but everything's fine. I'll be heading out soon, too. And to be clear, this teacher is not man. This is someone else. And at 4:40, the teacher from the academy arrives for Han. She can't just text. She needs to come up to the front desk, and they call from there. And the after-school program teacher would let the girl go, and she was supposed to walk down the stairs. But instead, the door to the audio classroom opens. Her leg is pulled inside, she is strangled and fatally stabbed with a weapon. Man had purchased the weapon that very same day. She told her colleagues she was stepping out to the restroom. But instead, she went out to the parking lot, got into her car, drove a kilometer to a kitchen utensil store. She was seen there on CCTV, calmly walked in, bought the weapon, a blade of 16 centimeters, total length 28. This one had good specifications. She really picked it out carefully. She wasn't buying it for cooking after all, and it's believed that by the time grandmother Kim opened the storage room door, Han was already deceased. But man didn't stop there. She was covered in the girl's evidence, and many leaned toward the view she wasn't planning to take her own life. We'll talk about that a little later, but premeditation was clearly present here. Several days before the fatal incident, during the analysis of her digital devices, they found searches about weapons, about means of attack, about how to inflict harm on other people. So this wasn't some split-second impulse. Man would later tell investigators, I was just irritated. For just 3 days, the vice principal hadn't let me teach after returning from winter break. The teachers didn't want her leading the children, and the vice principal didn't want it either. They were asking her to handle some kind of paperwork around the school. They were simply uncomfortable with her. She'd been on a 6-month medical leave and came back after 20 days. They kept her at a distance. And now, with Han no longer alive, man in the hospital says, this depression is what led me to it. And one expert responds, such extreme aggression almost never manifests in depression, meaning her depression was probably real, but it wasn't the cause. She's trying to dump everything onto the illness. But one of the officials comments, the suspect was experiencing conflict at home as well. She had deep, accumulated resentment, and this resentment spilled out. And why Han specifically? Man herself says, I had no contact with her. I was just choosing the easiest target. She was supposed to leave the school last from the after-school program. One of the experts believes that Man had tried to pull this off 4 days earlier with a colleague, wanted to take her life and, well, end her own. But it didn't work out. With an adult colleague, it was physically impossible. The type of person who consciously or subconsciously doesn't want harm to come to themselves. So even if she did want to end her own life, she wouldn't choose an opponent equal to her in strength. And the criminologist continues, Such offenders don't go after strong targets, they're afraid of getting hurt themselves. If this had happened at a high school, she wouldn't have gone after an older student. Another expert says the depression she'd suffered from for 7 years isn't directly connected to this crime. Depression doesn't manifest as taking someone's life. There's another theory, by the way. Some people believe that Man didn't initially plan to end her own life, and that she could have gone on to harm others, colleagues or students, if it hadn't been for the parental monitoring app. Remember how it kept sending alarm signals through the alarm clock? Kim was sending them and could hear that on the other end, Man's heavy breathing continued for about another hour, meaning she was just sitting next to the victim, not knowing what to do. Then, when the grandmother opened the storage room door, you could see that Man herself wasn't injured, and after that, she still had enough strength to lock the door from the inside. So it turns out she only tried to harm herself after being discovered, and her own wounds weren't life-threatening either. Maybe this points to her mental instability, but it wasn't a genuine attempt. The intent was there, but the survival instinct may have kicked in. But there's another point. According to Han's autopsy, there isn't a single hesitation mark on her wounds. With victims, the first strikes are often shallower, then deeper. You can see the person sort of working themselves up to it. But with Han, all the wounds were deep right from the start. Many experts say that if Man had really wanted to take Han's life and immediately end her own, the wounds would have shown hesitation, but there were none, which means she was resolute. And one more criminologist draws attention to the moment with the grandmother. When Kim's grandmother opened the door and asked about her granddaughter, Man simply looked her in the face and lied. There was no panic, no nervousness. And what's frightening isn't just that she was able to stay calm. It's also a clear attempt to cover her tracks, not the behavior of someone who's about to end their own life. And not just in Daejeon. Koreans from other cities who drove for hours are coming to the school, laying chrysanthemums, leaving sweets at the school gates. Small yellow umbrellas are hung on the fence in front of the school so that the dolls and toys left for Han won't get soaked by the snow. A local florist is handing out 100 chrysanthemums so that people can come pay their respects. Flowers and toys line an entire block around the school, and this goes on for 100 days, a high-profile case in Korea. I know there are plenty of tragedies like this in America too, and they're just as significant. But unfortunately, in America, people have sadly grown accustomed to the idea that school isn't the safest place. That in itself is horrific and monstrous. In Korea, however, that level of violence in schools doesn't exist. Bullying, yes, that exists. But for an 8-year-old child to lose their life on school grounds, for Koreans, that's a shock. And not just for them, for the international audience as well. Han receives wreaths from major corporations, from local and national soccer clubs. Members of parliament come to the memorial, and even the acting president of South Korea. Not President Yoon himself, he's been suspended, but specifically the acting president. And at this point, many people thought, well, the case will move toward trial next, but no. The case takes a very strange turn and transforms into something more than just a story about a tragic death. But personally, I didn't want to include in this account much of what happened next. I thought maybe I should cut it, but the feeling that kept haunting me as I watched this online discussion, how the topic drifted away from Han into a gaming forum, and then God knows where, it's very telling. We still live in a world where the victim has to be perfect, or nearly perfect, to earn sympathy. That's a very difficult standard that society imposes. In this case, it's visible as plain as day. Han's father used to frequent a certain gaming forum. This forum, where the users are mostly men, half the posts are about games, the other half are jokes that most women wouldn't find funny. And Kim comments, "My girlfriend is a grapefruit." Well, if my husband talked that way, he'd stop being my husband. Because it's humiliating, of course, but he has absolutely no connection to Han or to her death. The 8-year-old lost her life for no reason. The father's post is from 2015, and many Koreans came out to defend Kim. This post is 10 years old. Yes, it's sexist, but he probably needs to reflect on himself. But that's not the most disturbing thing you can read on the internet. And in general, even if the post were worse, should it really be brought up? Are we now going to dig up the entire digital history since 2015 of every person whose relative has died? Well, that would turn into a much bigger conversation about how we handle people's digital footprints in general. And you know what's interesting? Society and culture still demand that the victim's family be absolutely flawless. Otherwise, sympathy isn't warranted. It's a comparison of completely unequal weight, some kind of strange bar. Then another post from 2019 on a thread about contraception. Han's father writes, quote 11, "This one came out heavier. It's recent. It's about his 2 children. It sounds like he needs his children, like he doesn't love them." Well, that's exactly what the Koreans spun it into. Then an anonymous post appears with an accusation. Dad Han borrowed 3.5 million won from someone I know to donate to some female streamer, and he didn't pay it back. He's on welfare. Han sends his daughter on field trips at the expense of government programs. He doesn't work himself. He sits in PC rooms all day watching female streamers. And he was also recently taken to court for harassing a female coworker. Or rather, give the money back to my dad. Koreans are genuinely confused about how to take this, and there's no proof. And the main thing is, you'd have to be really immoral to bring this up right now. And someone wrote, if you'd said this a year from now, okay, fine. But now, after such fresh, horrific events, for what? An attempt to ride the hype. If you're doing this for attention, off someone else's grief, you yourself are unwell, and the 8-year-old just lost her life. These are old debts. And do people even understand where this is leading? Why are they doing this? I don't want to play psychoanalyst, but my Korean researchers say that sometimes, when a case raises a problem too big for an individual person to comprehend or influence, it's easier to find someone to blame among those who raise the issue. It's like the very fact of discussion is irritating, because you can't do anything. By the way, it's a small group of people. They write in the comments, "Are you all out of your minds? Digging through his old posts? What is this?" But it's a small group, yet very loud, very. And because of this, a topic that was supposed to be about Han and about how to make sure this doesn't happen again has turned into public drama about her father. And if you go to English language sources, you won't see any of this. But on Korean sources, half the comments are specifically about the father, and in some videos, 90% of the comments are about him. And again, let me repeat, the majority of Koreans are on the side of Lee's father. It's just this small, loud tale that completely overshadows everything. And this whole story of the campaign against the father started after a series of his press conferences, and it's understandable that they happened. This is one of the highest profile cases in the country, but certain netizens began picking apart how he speaks, how his tone sounds, and well, I do understand. Sometimes his words or intonations might seem strange if you're not trying to empathize, but it seems to me that Koreans have lost the point in this regard. They twist his words, they look for ways to blame him, and why? It's unclear. Maybe it's easier to blame the father than to think about how to fix the education system. This is a huge issue, and it's very difficult to solve. And finding a single person to blame, well, that's just way too easy. I don't know what these people's motives are, nobody knows. There are wicked people in this world, and people are acting as if he's worse than the perpetrator. Well, this is just absurd. They're picking apart every word he says. I'll repeat, certain moments can look strange if you strip away the context and ignore the situation. But keep in mind, this is a man who had never appeared in the media before, and suddenly he was placed in front of all the major outlets within 48 hours. Cameras shoved in his face, demanding comments. And on top of all that, this is the most terrifying moment of his life. He had no time to process his grief, to put his feelings in order, and he's simply trying to convey his experience to the world so that this doesn't happen to any other child. And at the very first press conference, he asks, "Please, stand silently for 10 seconds. Pray that Han is happy in heaven. Thank you." He bows to the journalists almost 90 degrees. And some of the netizens, just a little. But in the comments, it sounds intense. He's constantly demanding things from people. 10 seconds of silence. Why is he demanding this? He also asked journalists to add at the end of their articles, Han, who became a little star, we love you, let's create the Han Law. By the way, we'll talk about the law separately too, it's controversial. But first, about the requests. He says, I sincerely ask the officials, please create a Han Law, so there won't be a second one. And I would be grateful if journalists added at the end of their articles and videos the phrase, Han, the adults are to blame, we love you. In American media, such requests are common practice, but in Korean media, not so much. And that's why some small group got infuriated. What do you mean, demands? We didn't like his demanding tone, meaning we planned to give 10 seconds of silence, but since you demanded it, now we won't. This is an absolutely absurd position, but they're seriously angry. And they also write, let the schools and teachers ask for forgiveness. Why should all the adults of Korea ask for forgiveness? We didn't do this. They write more harshly, what is this even? The father looks almost cheerful. Why should we, Korean adults, apologize? We didn't force you to put your child in after-school care, so now he's being accused even of sending his daughter to the after-school program. By the way, almost all families in Korea do this because both parents work. And they also write, don't draw conclusions about the entire adult population based on one deranged, evil teacher. We're sad, we're hurting, but why should I apologize? Well, it's not really that personal a moment, not personal enough to dwell on it like that. But the entire Korean internet is buzzing about these comments, and I was actually debating whether to include this episode at all. But because it's such a huge piece of the conversation in Korea, why not try to understand why? They also point to the moment where he said, write underscore underscore, quote underscore 13 underscore 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 in the articles. The next day, that wasn't in the articles. They ask why nobody wrote it, but I looked, it's not anywhere. And many people say he reads the articles and makes remarks to the journalists, what a bore he is. Then he says, the main problem in Korea right now is the Han case. Well, I don't understand why specifically my daughter, and why this is happening, he says, and immediately apologizes, I need a minute to calm down. So he himself notices it. I think his words are completely understandable. He's a parent. The most important thing in his life has just vanished. The matter is serious. Well, some ill-wishers, they didn't like that. They say our president got impeached. There's a political crisis in the country, and he's calling the Han case the main problem. Someone writes, I thought it was a police officer at the briefing. Look at the way he's presenting it, and they also speculate, is this really the actual father? It's like he doesn't perceive himself as Han, but as himself again. And you know, I'm trying to understand why people interpret it this way. Well, what's it like to be in his position? Well, it's clear he's under the cameras, and he's just uncomfortable. He's really not at ease. His voice is sometimes faster, sometimes sad. There's a tense intonation, but people read it as him being glad to be on camera. At another moment, the father of Han describes how he imagines his daughter's final minutes. He says, the sound of my alarm that I triggered through an app. Imagine how much pain Han was in. She was struck dozens of times. If only someone had just heard that sound, my Han would have been in pain, but she wouldn't have become a little star, meaning, if someone had heard, maybe she would have been alive. Yes, she would have been in pain because she still would have needed treatment for her injuries, but she wouldn't have passed. And this phrase, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 14, underscore, underscore, is really the key one. And that's the very thing they twisted. But Han became a little star first for her friends, for the future students of the elementary school, and they ripped that part out of context too. The father's main thought from the very beginning, if it weren't for Han, that teacher wouldn't have stopped. She would have kept going until she took a child's life. That's what he believes. And many people believe, and he finds at least some consolation in the thought that his daughter saved others and became a little star. And the name Han in Korean means sky. That's why he says, she is in the sky, she is a star in the sky. But it's not about fame, it's about the sky. And any Korean understands this. But any netizen writing hateful comments knows that the name means her. And they don't know that in this context. They just decide to skip it because it's easier for them to write, "He is obsessed with fame." It just seems to them that his reaction doesn't match how, in their opinion, the father of the victim should behave. Their expectations of him. It's a typical story. Everyone says grief looks different in different people, but as soon as they see a living example, they don't like it. And I would understand these people if there were really a lot of murky moments in the case, something that would make you suspect the father. Here everything is transparent. Why even discuss it? And part of the netizens shape this into the image of a man who loves fame and wants TV airtime. And no matter how you look at it, he doesn't look sad. Just someone who enjoys the situation, who wants to look good in front of reporters. It's just absurd. And one more thing. The father behaved strangely from the very beginning. Instead of grieving for the child, he demands that certain words be written at the end of the article, that the nation give 10 seconds of silence. This is not normal, they write. Instead of taking care of his wife and second daughter, he endlessly gives interviews. Here's the important thing. He himself says it. The police tell me almost nothing about the progress of the investigation. I learn about it from the news, and in this context, it's logical that he constantly reads articles, waits for something new to be published. That's why he noticed that the reporters didn't include his request at the end. He directly says, "The detective tells me nothing. I asked the supervisor what articles are coming out, and they tell him nothing." Some netizens say he's demanding. They say he demands from celebrities, politicians, police officers, "Come to the funeral, pay your respects," so that the nation prays for 10 seconds. But it's a request, not a demand. And mostly Koreans understand this. They see how angry he is with the police, and maybe this anger will help at least some of those netizens with their pride understand something. He says none of the detectives on the case, nor the prosecutor who came to her, not one came to pay respects at the funeral. And no one tells me what is happening. Many ordinary people came from all over the country to honor her. By the way, to honor is not to demand. It's what is usually done at funerals in Korea, and he uses it in a human sense. They came to say goodbye, to bid farewell. 3 police officers who had nothing to do with the case came. They hugged me, cried with me. They said, "Forgive us that we couldn't protect her." People like that exist, but how can those who are leading this case, who should be here in real time keeping us informed, fail to come? And he finds out from the news. I don't even know if it's true or not, and that's true. There was a lot of fake news about the Han case. Some journalists wrote that the father wanted to meet with the perpetrator, wanted to meet with her family, and he had to debunk those rumors. That's why he's angry. He finds out about the investigation from the media, and part of it is fake. And now, when something new comes out about her, he doesn't know if it's true or not. And the police don't talk to him. They didn't even come to the funeral. But this is nonsense. Some netizens are complaining. He wants to be treated as a VIP. Most officers don't come to the victim's funeral. It's simply not in the protocol. And his tone sounds too arrogant. They write, instead of being angry at the perpetrator, he's angry at the Koreans who didn't come. This anger toward citizens is stronger than toward the one responsible for the death. That's strange. And another comment. Dad is counting condolences instead of seeking justice. And there are those who say it's reasonable to be angry. To learn the news through media, through fakes, that's understandable. And even if it's not understandable, he, a grieving father, has the right. Another sore point. At one of the press conferences, the father tells the reporters, "It's time to wrap up. I'm no longer answering questions. There's nothing left to film here. I gave the interview. I'm closing it for today. Reporters, head upstairs. We've prepared food for you. Go eat." It looks strange. But inside the funeral home, he says something different. "Reporters, the service is running a little late. You don't have to leave monetary gifts. Lower your cameras, pray for Han. Say hello to her, see her off beautifully, and please eat. I know it's hard for everyone right now. And when the food is brought out, eat before you leave. This is the last meal our Han is treating you to. At Korean funerals, food is served and guests are obliged to eat it. It's like a final meal. It's customary to leave monetary gifts. It's support for the family. They've lost someone. They're not working. They're paying for the funeral. He probably saw how emotionally the reporters were taking it. It's the kind of case that even gets to reporters. Many of them are also parents of small children. Maybe he saw their emotions when the cameras were off. Maybe some of them tried to leave money and he said, "No, please, I didn't invite you for that. No money is needed." He just wanted Han to be honored, to draw attention to the case so this would never happen again. And maybe he was trying to lift their spirits to say, "Come on, guys, we're all in this together, like, she was your niece too." It was. It's all right, we'll all get through this. But naturally, critics twisted this in the strangest possible direction. It's very complicated, and we really don't know anything. If we don't see a perfect picture, a perfect victim's family, most people lose sympathy. But that's truly frightening. He also said, "I don't understand politics. Officials of our country came to see Han, and I want them to hear my story. I want to get promises. That's why I asked them." And it seems to me his anger is justified. You could even say he did the right thing by trying to speed up the passage of the law. He understands that if you ask and pressure politicians to come and listen, they won't be able to just ignore it anymore. But the manner in which he said it, of course, struck some as irritating. And the acting president did come after all. And this brings us to the next point of tension, the Han Law, which is currently being discussed. To go on leave. For Man to return to school 20 days after the start of her sick leave, she would have had to get a certificate. And she was given one. 20 days after a 6-month sick leave, basically all good, she's fine. But that's strange, and many are talking about it. Also, under this law, children in after-school programs must be handed over directly. That is, instead of letting the child leave the classroom on their own, the teacher must personally accompany them until they're picked up. And in concept, the law creates a system. Teachers receive mandatory leave when there are mental health issues, protecting both teachers and students. And the Deputy Prime Minister supported the proposal and said, "We will establish measures by which returning to work will be possible only with confirmation of the ability to work normally." And the majority agrees, something has to be done. This happened on school grounds. A teacher took the life of a colleague 4 days before. She had been on sick leave. Everyone knew about her depression. Clearly, measures are needed, and Han's family will most likely receive compensation for everything she lost. But the Han Law itself is controversial. It's important to note that this dispute is not about Han. She didn't do anything wrong. This isn't about her at all. This isn't a justification for Man. She deserves the maximum punishment. Many think the law isn't sufficiently developed, that we're rushing, and that it's only good in concept. First, the violation of teachers' privacy. The law creates situations where they can be manipulated. Their mental health would be directly tied to their job performance. This could worsen their condition even more. Obviously, this isn't about the man. Well, the man simply shouldn't have been allowed to come to work. But imagine a teacher wants to get treatment. He's afraid the school will find out. He'll be forcibly sent on leave. And what would become of his career? Also, under this law, it would be easier to file complaints against a teacher claiming he's mentally unwell. Many already consider this inappropriate. A minor student cannot determine whether their teacher is mentally healthy or not, but they could file a complaint. And this would set off a chain of actions that could remove the teacher from work and put his career at risk. And let's be honest, here's why this is frightening. Teachers in South Korea, like everywhere else, are underpaid and overworked. But in Korea, they also often become victims. They're bullied by students and parents themselves. In an English class, essentially, the student is the highest authority, and if a student lied and accused the teacher of anything at all, the parent files a complaint, and almost always the school sides with the parent. And in one street poll, people were asked what authority teachers have in Korea, and everyone answered that they have none at all. If a teacher tries to do something and the parent doesn't like it, a complaint comes in, and it's already almost impossible to teach children. Teachers in this country have authority at rock bottom, and education, something serious is wrong. Someone tells a story. Teachers have their personal Instagrams discovered, and parents deliberately track them down. No one asked them to do this, by the way. And if a teacher is relaxing on the weekend, going out to dinner with friends, and the parents don't like how she's dressed, they file an official complaint. And the teacher is reprimanded for what she wears in her free time. And knowing Korean culture, I'm sure it would be some modest dress with a couple of centimeters of bare shoulder. And another person interviewed says it's like a teacher shouldn't have a personal life at all. And Korea right now is a system where education is hyper-competitive. Many parents believe their child can do no wrong. This is my child first and foremost. A very selfish narrative. If the child is doing poorly in school, maybe it's the teacher's fault. Let's get rid of him and put in another one. And I don't care how the other children are doing. The main thing is that my child comes out on top. In China, it's the same thing, by the way. If a parent thinks their child is doing poorly in school, they'll do anything, even if it means replacing the teacher, getting them fired. Yes, this happens everywhere, because too much is riding on education. Last year in Korea, there were massive teacher protests. Parents accused teachers of abusing children if they tried in any way to restrain an aggressive student, to silence a student who's disrupting the lesson. That can be interpreted as emotional abuse. For example, a teacher took away reward stickers from a student because this student tried to attack another child with scissors while holding these stickers, these rewards. She took away the stickers, saying that's not what you get them for, and the parents filed a complaint. The administration reprimanded the teacher. Teachers say they don't even feel safe teaching anymore. Teachers in South Korea have taken their own lives, some right on school grounds. This drew attention to how broken the system is. And over 5 years in Korea, more than 100 teachers have ended their own lives. One of them was hounded by parents simply for trying to teach and discipline. She wrote in her diary, "Every time I walk into the classroom, my chest tightens as if I'm falling somewhere. I don't even know where I am." A 23-year-old teacher with PTSD just from walking into her classroom from her students' parents. She was found deceased. After that, there was a protest of 200,000 teachers in front of the National Assembly. And one teacher said back then, "Look, teachers didn't come out for a pay raise, not for a better system for themselves. We're just asking the government to protect them from situations that students and parents create. And Korean teachers only want not to be involved in education, and that's all we need." And another comment, "I worked at a Korean school. It was terrible. Teachers quit every year. Some had breakdowns in the bathrooms. Some students would falsely accuse them out of revenge to get them fired. And on top of that, in Korea, until age 14, there are no real consequences for actions. So kids do whatever they want. So yes, everyone agrees that mentally unstable teachers have no place around children, especially in this specific case. But also, in future cases, if a teacher shows signs of aggression, if something happens, they either need to be fired or imprisoned or sent to a psychiatric facility. Something needs to be done. They're dangerous. But this law raises a lot of questions. It adds one more string you can pull to take down a teacher. I hope this law will be used correctly and not abused by some spoiled bully who terrorizes their schools and community. That's a comment. I hope that the children who need protection will get it. But how to guarantee that is unclear. There will be people who use it to their advantage. Another concern is stigma. If a teacher goes on mandatory leave because something was noticed in her, does anyone really believe she'd be taken back? I mean, these are the same parents who take away stickers and awards. Would they let her back? Most likely no. It can be passed, but conceptually it's good, and in practice it's unclear. And no one here is criticizing Khan's father. He's not a legislator, that's not his job. Something happened, and the main task is to make sure it doesn't happen to any other child. And so legislators need to refine it, write out the wording, add articles, so that teachers are protected too. But it doesn't seem like this is happening yet. And this hand-to-hand transfer, many teachers are also upset because these after-school programs hang by a thin thread. Parents pay something like $60 for an 11-week program. That's nothing at all if you think about the cost of daycare and childcare. The state promised to hire separate teachers for after-school programs, but isn't hiring them. And the teachers who come in at 5 or 6 in the morning and teach all day, they're the ones running them too. And then there are plans for tomorrow, checking homework. So they work 14 to 16 hours, and now add handing off each child personally. So you want to protect the children, but it drives teachers crazy. Yet this is the very system that drives teachers to insanity. And if you fixed it, well, it's not certain that Man wouldn't have committed the crime anyway. I think she would have committed it regardless of her profession. It's complicated, and this conversation about Khan completely goes off the rails when one right-wing cartoonist publishes a whole article with headlines, "Is a child's passing an achievement?" He writes, "They always want things like this. Is it easier for them if a law is named in honor of their child? Is that the only achievement in life?" It's a completely insane thing to say, but this publication made everything worse, because now we're one more step removed from Khan's passing. Because she's right-wing. The comments section turned into a full-on brawl, right against left, and once again went off somewhere in a completely different direction. And here's a thought. I admire that Khan's father wants to pass a law that helps teachers with mental illnesses. Whether it works or not is another matter, but the fact that he wants to help them rather than punish them after what he and his family went through, that really means a lot. And it's truly sad that this girl's whole life has been reduced to just how she passed away. And now also to digging up old posts from her father, and to all these conversations going on right now. Many of Han's classmates are trying to remember her the way she was. And everyone says she was a good and bright child. Even at 8 years old, kids start testing boundaries, acting up. Han did everything with a positive attitude. She never complained. About school, never complained about her extra classes. She was always happy to try something new. She loved soccer, signed up for the local kids club, was so enthusiastic, and was actually really good at it. With the older kids, she called them they. That's the older sister, and they called her, to quote, 17. That's like a corporate dinner after work. Adults usually can't stand it, but Han would say, quote, 18. She always took on everything new with eagerness. And when her parents picked her up from after-school care, everyone remembers how she'd run to them at full speed, jumping into hugs like a rocket. Many of her friends and relatives sent her off with kind words. Things like, "Play happily in heaven without fear," the way they say her name. "Our Han, to our heavens, who went on a happy journey to heaven." Right now, the woman has been charged with taking the victim's life, and in South Korea, capital punishment has not been formally abolished. But the last execution was almost 30 years ago, so the likelihood of her being executed is low, although many Korean netizens are demanding exactly that. Nevertheless, she faces life imprisonment for luring and taking the life of a minor under 13, and that's the stage Han's case is at right now in South Korea. I know that in most English-language sources and media, the discussion is about everything that came after, and I told you about it. I know that in many Russian schools there's also a lot of chaos, in the sense that teachers are under enormous moral pressure, just an enormous amount. You literally can't do anything with the kids. You can't lecture them, you can't conduct lessons the way you want, the way you see fit, well, the way you want. Of course, there are good students, diligent, hardworking. They can complain to their parents, and the parents already have other levers of pressure on the teachers. And now many teachers create second V-contact pages, second Instagram pages, simply so they aren't seen, simply to have some kind of private personal life. But even this, to some extent, is forbidden. And no one ever saw him again. But years later, in this tangled case, one small detail surfaces, a souvenir decision-making coin, which would become the key to understanding the motives of this stepfather. If you look at the entire history of Hollywood, it would be hard to find a more contradictory and strange union than the one we're about to discuss. She gained worldwide fame back in the 60s thanks to her role in the cult film about Rosemary's Heir. Her partner was also an extremely significant figure in the world of cinema, and over the 12 years of their romantic relationship, they managed to release 13 joint films, yet the tabloids never stopped gossiping about the oddities of their domestic life. Many were struck by the fact that in all those years, they never formalized their marriage and didn't even attempt to move in together. Living in 2 separate homes for an entire decade, an unusual choice, but it was their personal one. Nevertheless, outside observers simply couldn't grasp what was holding this union together at all, especially considering that Mia had 6 children in her care. Some were related to her by blood from previous relationships, while others she had adopted. Her beloved, a renowned director, took an extremely rigid stance. He had no interest whatsoever in co-parenting. He openly and firmly stated that he had no intention of being involved in their lives, that he wasn't going to support them financially or emotionally, since he absolutely couldn't see himself in the role of a father, and perhaps he simply couldn't tolerate those who were still in school. At least, that's what people thought at the start of their journey. Things took a completely different turn. The couple welcomed a shared heir, Ronan Farrow, who later became an outstanding journalist and a Pulitzer Prize winner. Over time, the director seemed to change his mind about parenthood and officially adopted 2 of Mia's adopted children. He began gradually integrating into family life and growing closer to at least 3 of the kids. And then, a year after he legally formalized his status as guardian for these young individuals, an event occurred that would cross out everything. Mia stopped by her partner's apartment, since they still lived separately, and discovered an entire stack of photographs there. These images were extremely explicit and graphic. The actress would later say that such shots, in all their bluntness and vulgarity, wouldn't have even been suitable for men's magazines. This was the level of far darker publications, and captured in them was a very young individual. She appeared to be around 21 years old. The director himself at that point was already well past 50. And most importantly, these weren't clippings from magazines or images printed in a lab. They were instant Polaroid snapshots. That could only mean one thing. The person behind the camera was most likely right there in the room at the moment the photos were taken. The betrayal, after so many years of life together, was a crushing blow in itself. But what Mia saw when she looked more closely at the details left her in a state of genuine shock. She couldn't believe her eyes as she examined the photos over and over again. The young woman in the pictures wasn't an actress he had crossed paths with on set or some stranger with whom he had felt a sudden spark of attraction. The smart, much younger woman in his care went by the name Soon Yi, and the timing all lined up, except for one small detail: Soon Yi. Here it's worth pausing to figure out whether she was a younger member of the family or an adopted ward who had appeared in the actress's life even before she met Woody Allen. And now Mia was seeing that very same young woman in her partner's apartment in photographs of a highly intimate nature. A natural question arises: so he had betrayed her with her own ward? It's important to understand whether she was among those he had officially welcomed into the family, and as would later become clear, the situation was different, but she was still her daughter. This is the very story of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow that could be the subject of an entirely separate documentary project. Among the younger members of the family is a girl named Dylan. Later, she would begin speaking about inappropriate behavior on Woody's part that allegedly took place when she was very young. And against the backdrop of these events, the union between Mia and Woody falls apart, while another of Mia's wards, who had come from Korea, ultimately ties her life to Alan, an official union with the very person who had essentially grown up before the eyes of his former companion. Woody himself insisted that Mia had simply convinced her other ward, Dylan, to give false testimony about incidents of a personal nature, and in his statements, he emphasized that Soon Yi was already 21 at the time, that she had formally reached adulthood. However, one important detail is worth noting: she had been only 11. And this is where a question arises that the entire world would later debate. Was there really no kind of psychological grooming directed at the young woman, with what followed being merely a transition into a relationship with her own mother's partner? Woody's own explanation in this whole situation is rather detached. He claimed he had never considered himself a father figure to Soon Yi or to anyone younger, since he had never lived in their apartment and never stayed there overnight until he had children of his own. And in his version, she was simply an adult woman whom he could have met anywhere. And the age difference between them was 35 years. He was 56, she was 21. And despite all the gossip, they remain together to this day, continuing to insist that there is nothing reprehensible about their union. Soon Yi herself later released a statement asking people not to lapse into excessive emotionality, claiming she was not some fragile soul who had suffered from pressure or inappropriate behavior on the part of an evil stepfather. This story is still considered one of the most controversial in Hollywood, and many people are still troubled by the fact that Woody so insistently denied his role as a mentor in order to justify his actions. And this is where the most frightening part lies. If he had known her since she was 11 and yet felt no paternal feelings toward her, then what exactly was on his mind at that moment? The phone was on the nightstand, and the screen was clear, and that's also strange. The situation with Woody Allen and Mia Farrow earned an entire documentary series in its time and an endless number of articles about what really happened. For an ordinary person, it's not the kind of thing that gets stuck in your head. There are moments when this story comes back up, and you just sit there thinking, my God, what an insane story that was. And recently, a documentary film came out about it, but hardly anyone reflects on it day in and day out. I mean, that would be at least strange. And if it weren't for Jennifer, that premonition, that greatest fear in the world, which kept surfacing in her mind again and again like an obsessive thought. Jennifer is a single mother from Florida raising a younger child, and when she finally enters a serious long-term relationship, she admits that her greatest nightmare was always the repetition of that very scenario. Jennifer literally tells her boyfriend Stefan that this is her main fear, a connection with my daughter, and you'd think, where do such thoughts even come from? But as it would later turn out, she affirmed this constantly. My greatest fear is that you'll leave me for her. Like in that story with Woody Allen, that you'll seduce her. I always said, Jennifer would say, that what I fear most is the situation where a stepfather grooms the younger one for years, and when she turns 18, they ultimately disappear together. She said this and didn't want it to happen, that you can't do that to her. And it's important to understand why someone would even say something like that. Jennifer herself explains it simply. She never knew how to trust. From childhood, she had been told never to trust men. Her mother literally drilled this belief into her head. Don't believe a single one of them. And 7 years later, Jennifer would show photos of Stefan engaging in inappropriate actions toward Maddie. And now Maddie has disappeared, and it's believed that the tragic outcome has come to pass. Yet Jennifer, at least for some period of time, remains on her husband's side. This is the case of Madeline Soto. A few important points before we continue. Today's analysis will touch on extremely difficult topics involving inappropriate actions toward those who are younger, severe mistreatment, and incest within the family. These issues will be raised repeatedly. If it becomes too heavy, take a break, get some fresh air, and I'll see you in the next video. But up until this moment, no one took the situation seriously. In this case, charges have already been filed, and there are quite a lot of them to note, more than 60 counts. However, as is often the case from a legal standpoint, there has not yet been a trial. So under the law, everyone is considered innocent until their guilt is officially proven. We have the right to our own conclusions. This entire story is divided into 2 parts. Nevertheless, here I'll try to lay everything out in as much detail as possible. To reconstruct the full picture, I studied more than 20 hours of video interviews, audio recordings, interrogations, and over 1,000 pages of court documents. New papers are constantly being published in this case, and the flow of information truly does not stop for a single minute. And so, of course, it would simply be impossible to fit everything into one video. And in the first part, we focused on Maddie's disappearance itself, on what happened that day, and on the extremely strange behavior of her mother, Jennifer Soto, literally from the moment she reported the disappearance. An enormous number of unexplained things come to the surface. And here, when the police ask, "Where did you look for her?" she answers, "Nowhere. I was at home and was working on protecting my mental health." Every detail in the mother's behavior seems suspicious. And later, a recording will surface in the case that will shift everything into motion. And next, in the second part of our analysis, we'll focus on Stefan Stearns, Jennifer Soto's partner, and on the conspiracy theories that arose around groups of those who are not of legal age operating on Telegram. Rumors of a pregnancy surface, and at a certain point, there are simply too many events to keep track of. Since we're on this topic, it's important to understand that back then, there was a popular trend on TikTok of checking your partner's private messages. But in reality, all of that, as would later become clear, was just a trifle. The real discovery worth examining is your man's account on the Reddit platform. If a person has a profile there, do you really know who he is until you've studied his history? And that was exactly the mood on TikTok. People shared advice on how to figure out a partner's username, which sections to pay attention to, and which pages are hidden communities where certain individuals simply echo each other. And that's when many wrote, "Be careful," or better yet, "Don't go in there at all. You'll never be able to come back." And there was one woman who discovered her companion's profile and recounted that while they were still just getting to know each other, he was using the platform for questionable connections. And as would later become clear, there were comments under specific photos of other women and requests for anonymous meetings, things she hadn't even suspected. And here they are, together for a year and a half now, and she's completely bewildered, realizing she doesn't know this person at all and has no idea what to do. She didn't understand whether she should just forget about it, since they weren't together at that moment, or whether she should have an open conversation and explain how unpleasant it had been to see all of that. It should be noted that this isn't the only case. Another woman was simply asking for advice because her partner was literally never offline. He claimed he just liked to stay up to date with the news, but the search history told a different story. It was nothing but adult content, fresh videos with random dancing women, and at that moment she too found herself facing a difficult choice. So think about it. What are all these platforms with all this sleaze for? Who comes up with them? How badly does the person who comes up with them want to make money off some kind of filth? Can you imagine? Is this really the world we live in? Do we all really need to be watching this much sleaze, writing comments there instead of lifting our own spirits somehow? Well, let's get back to the case. At 7:40 p.m., he left the house and never made contact again, and he had created a profile under the username, and behind that Latin word meaning _____0__, thousands of pages of his personal history were hidden. And as would later become clear, many experts in such matters give the same exact advice. If you ever decide to take a look inside such an account, there's no going back, and you'll never be able to unsee what you found there. To understand what truly disturbing things lay hidden, it took analyzing many posts and comments. And it's important to understand that this wasn't just an anonymous resource, but a personal profile through which you could trace, step by step, the entire evolution of this person. And upon detailed examination, it turned out that 98% of all his publications were devoted to absolutely neutral topics: board games, Disney, and a fascination with Tamagotchis, those digital pets in the form of keychains that you need to care for and feed, otherwise they would cease to exist, after which they had to be revived again. These devices can be black and white or color, but in this case we're talking about serious collecting of rare vintage models. As would later become evident from the investigation itself, this person was spending impressive sums on specimens whose cost could reach hundreds of dollars. It occupied a significant part of his life, and here we dive into a real rabbit hole, because he constantly wore these devices on his belt, bought accessories for them, and devoted an enormous amount of time to them. And it should be noted that this niche hobby in itself seems harmless and even deserves a certain amount of respect. His online activity raised no suspicions whatsoever, so what did the remaining 2% truly look like? As they say, oh, that 2%. And as would later become clear, it was precisely in these rare comments left in sections like Ask Reddit that the details were hidden, which consequently needed to be studied first. And time-wise, everything matched up, except for one small detail. At 1:20 p.m., a question appears in the digital logs that, knowing the circumstances of the case now, looks especially grim. If you were to take the path of those who take lives, who would become your target? And the answer sounds almost mundane. People who drive around traffic jams on the shoulder, those who don't let others merge, or those who barge into the express checkout with a mountain of purchases at the store. Well, basically, the most selfish and rude members of society. A rather specific choice, and immediately afterward, a discussion of whether a thumb is just a finger. And here's an answer in the spirit of formal logic. All thumbs are fingers, but not all fingers are thumbs. And technically, it's all correct, but in this stream of information, the logic seems superfluous. And at 1:55 p.m., the examination of this body of data continues. And the question about what instantly ruins the atmosphere at any party. He writes, the guy with a bunch of conspiracy theories who pushes his conversations on everyone and tries to make them all believe in them. As will become clear later, the author finds this an amusing character. But, as they say, to each their own. And when he's not busy answering, he drops his signature one-liners. They're not the most original, but what matters is sensing a certain manner. And at 2:26 p.m., he leaves a note. Amusing, but common sense is actually not that common. And then he goes back to the question, what topics in comedy should be taboo? And the answer is none. Here's where things start getting stranger. A question to the men of Reddit. What runs through your mind when a woman starts unzipping her pants? And the answer in the spirit of dark humor, ma'am, I don't know you, and we're actually at a bus station. This digital trail stretches on endlessly. How do you love yourself, usually with your left hand? And at this moment, everything becomes far too personal. And you keep scrolling in search of something else that might help understand exactly how this tragic outcome came to befall the young woman. The phone was lying on the nightstand, the screen was clean, and that too was strange. And so, to better understand the personality, it's worth looking at his past revelations. He often returned to the topic of his previous relationship, which, in his version, was steeped in lies. He described months of suspicion, deleted messages, hidden numbers, and how his partner would hide her phone in bed so he wouldn't see incoming messages. And all the warning signs, as he himself would later admit, were right there in plain sight. And at some point the lies came to light, followed by a confession and a breakup. But even after an attempt to reconcile, it all repeated itself. What matters is that Sustanet rated his own physical attributes extremely highly. He emphasized that in terms of looks and understanding of female physiology, he was practically flawless, but it didn't matter. He saw the reason in his partner's diagnosis, bipolar disorder, which in a manic state pushed her into connections with every man she met who showed any interest in her, and essentially this experience stripped him of his confidence for years to come. And for almost 6 years, by his own admission, he stewed in a broth of self-pity and depression, regretting the wasted years of his prime. Only in his relationship with Jennifer did he seem to find the long-awaited stability. In reality, they had already been together for nearly 2 years, and at that point, he was already publishing those very posts on Reddit, and he was already in the relationship. The further we scroll, the more specific the content becomes, and Sustained continued to discuss his physical attributes in detail, insisting that the secret wasn't in size, but in perfect proportions, or in everything at once. And up to that moment, no one took the situation seriously. And it must be noted that at first glance, the activity of the user under the nickname Sustained online didn't raise particular suspicions, being rather candid. In some posts, he reflected on his own attractiveness, mentioning that his physical parameters had always allowed him to feel more confident. In others, he enthusiastically talked about purchasing virtual creatures resembling Tamagotchis, and he separately emphasized that he had acquired one of them specifically for his stepdaughter. In fact, he often wrote about her, focusing on their shared activities, whether it was painting miniatures for Warhammer, another type of tabletop game, or other similar hobbies. And it's important to understand that in these stories, details about her character often came through. He mentioned that when she turned 12, she took failures extremely painfully, and a crushing defeat in most cases ended in tears and emotional breakdowns. They were neck and neck, But usually, when reviewing someone's message history, people aren't looking for confirmation of family bliss. They're looking for what's commonly called a red flag, and in one of the threads, such markers were present. When asked about the difficulties of personal life after 30, he gave an extremely sharp response. He complained about the appearance of women his age and mentioned the emotional baggage of first marriages and how he was still in school. In the finale, he directly stated that the current situation made him understand DiCaprio's strategy, and at this very moment, it becomes clear that behind the familiar facade, hidden aggression begins to emerge. And later, a recording would appear in the case that would set everything in motion. In other forum threads, he actively engages in discussions with people seeking life advice or support in difficult situations. For example, one user under the nickname __quote_1___ described a case where his buddy picked him up in a stolen vehicle, which essentially made the author of the message an accomplice to a crime. Sue responds to this rather bluntly. He predicts that this person will end his path behind bars, where those around him will quickly understand his true nature, and in such moments, everything happening starts to look downright grim. And in fact, he often launches into lengthy reflections on nature, and his thoughts are full of deep pessimism. And as it would later come to light, his work at a major theme park in a security role, we recall that he was employed at Disney, allowed him to observe human nature daily in its most varied manifestations. And his outlook is bleak. Costenta refers to certain individuals as savages, utterly devoid of self-control in the absence of a system of rewards or penalties. And according to his version, 80% of the population are empty zombies who simply drift along with the current, not bothering with critical thinking, reading signs, or even basic adherence to instructions. To him, they are nothing more than a useless waste of oxygen. And here another strange detail emerges. He regularly visits a forum for those who are just beginning their life's journey and proceeds to lecture them. And essentially, he spends a suspiciously large amount of time there, sharing experience that seems perfectly logical and at first raises no alarm. I want to say that we very often have people in our comments who want to teach us something. Everything we do, of course, isn't done blindly, but each time it's a method of trial and error. You have to understand that a YouTube channel is a method of trial and error. The same strategy never works. And when someone sits down to write to us who reads all the comments, who answers all the messages, really, in our YouTube comments, we have exactly the same kind of forum, and you can trace just as easily where there's a person with some genuinely revealing psychological trauma and all the rest, versus where there's an adequate person, and where they're simply, well, honestly saying, here and here you did such and such. I didn't like it, overall cool. That is, you understand, a psychologically healthy person will never pour out so much nonsense unrelated to the text, or some personal grievances of their own. It's always visible, so keep that in mind. It's simply visible who thinks what, how they think, what psychological stage they're at, and so on. That is, we, of course, don't pass judgment on anyone, but it's always visible. And we truly only ever respond to the most adequate comments. However, in certain messages that he responds to, we're returning now to the story, he doesn't conceal his rage, as happened in a community where they were discussing the right of younger family members to physical inviolability and personal boundaries. The author of the post was urging people not to force those who are still small to display affection toward relatives against their will, so as not to destroy their sense of autonomy. And he responds to this in his sharp manner. If an elderly relative is going to leave this world soon, you should simply show some attention in return and hug her. After all, she's doing it out of love, and he acknowledges the importance of personal boundaries, but believes that adults should understand. She's just being moody or difficult and is pushing him to overcome this barrier for the sake of reciprocity. And it's important to understand his logic. He's convinced that growing up means, among other things, being able to do things that are unpleasant. And if moral norms require it, please notice such tendencies in yourself, if you have them. You see a person, they say something to you, and you don't have any pedagogical patience with them, that someday they'll come around to it. This is called pedagogical patience. You know that someday a person will arrive at this or that wisdom that you've already reached, but you don't impose this wisdom on them. You don't inflict good upon them with your thinking. And looking back, he expresses regret that he didn't treat his grandmother better while he had the chance, but at the same time he adds, "For those who haven't grown up yet." Elderly people just seem unpleasant. And at one point he even gets into heated arguments, declaring that he never called for direct coercion of those who are younger. I remind you that he writes in a community for those who are just beginning their lives, not for adults. You understand? So, at 7:40 p.m., he left the house and never made contact again, and Stephen Stearns crossed the threshold of the police station and immediately found himself in the interrogation room. Here, it's important for us to understand that in such situations, adults must decide for themselves whether their behavior is justified, or whether they're simply behaving foolishly. And years later, someone will inevitably return to this discussion thread. But in 2025, comments will appear there asking, "Was what happened to the 13-year-old justified in your view?" This man, the 38-year-old who was living with Jennifer, is left alone within 4 walls, where he'll have to sit and wait a full 3.5 hours before detectives finally come in. We note that there is no law requiring the police to attend to a person immediately upon arrival, just so you know. And places like this don't have good service, and you can throw a scene, complaining that they made you wait 3 hours, and at that moment it may seem that the police are working inefficiently or that they just have chaos in there. In reality, the detectives are doing all of this absolutely intentionally. Psychological pressure, isolation, a tiny little room, and unfamiliar surroundings. These are tools for creating stress. You understand perfectly well that you're most likely being watched, and you really are under surveillance. That feeling weighs on you heavily. You have to replay in your head, over and over, every answer you're about to give. And later it turns out this doesn't help you at all. The greater the isolation, the deeper the loneliness, the higher the stress level becomes, and the stories you come up with actually have no logic to them, and that's exactly when it becomes obvious. The far-fetched lie that came to mind, in a normal setting you'd think, wait, no one will believe this? It's absolutely ridiculous. But in that room you decide, fine, this is what I'm going to say right now. It's the only thing that sounds logical. Under stress, under complete exhaustion, and this is important, this creation of mental fatigue is a method. And by the way, if you didn't know, this same method is also used in cults. That's how they intimidate people, lock them away, isolate them completely, and essentially the person is left alone inside their own head and creates an illusion for themselves, and moreover, that illusion is instilled in them. They're told how to think, what to do, meaning your autonomy is completely stripped away from you, and that full pressure of the walls, that's what they do in cults. And while the officers in the back room are drinking coffee, observing you talking among themselves, you remain one-on-one with yourself. And this torment begins. What do I know that the police don't? What have they managed to find out so far? Meaning, do I need to come up with something? Some kind of story? Well, by that point, the police already had a number of facts that called the entire official version into question, and here's what investigators knew. Madeline Soto disappears literally the day after her 13th birthday. The party took place on Sunday, and by Monday morning she had vanished without a trace. And it's important to understand that the last person to see her alive was Stephen, and the version being put forward by both her mother, Jennifer Soto, and Stephen himself was the following. On Sunday evening, Jennifer comes home from her shift at Disney, while Stephen, at that time, is helping Madeline get ready for bed. And the mother had missed her medication the day before and was feeling, as she herself put it, off. Stephen and Madeline should lie down together in the guest room so that I can get a proper night's sleep. And typically, the 3 of them all slept together. The mother, 13-year-old Madeline, and Stefan, that was the arrangement they had. So the suggestion of spending the night in the guest room didn't raise any suspicions. And the next morning, Stefan agrees to drive Madeline to school. And then he claims that actually they'd leave a bit earlier, and he wouldn't just drop her off. They'd also stop by McDonald's. As would later be revealed, they did indeed leave an hour earlier, but they never stopped at the restaurant. Moreover, Stefan claims he dropped off the 13-year-old an hour before classes began, across the street from the school. Allegedly, she was embarrassed by his car. However, no one believes this version, and on top of that, the vehicle was later spotted in various parts of the city, with Madeline still inside, of course. And ultimately, investigators state plainly, this account makes no sense whatsoever. It's full of contradictions and inconsistencies. The phone was lying on the nightstand, the screen was clean, and that too was strange. In this story, testimony shifts just as rapidly as the overall picture of events. When Jennifer Soto gave her first statements to police, she claimed that on Monday morning she saw Madeline getting ready for class. Later, the version changes. Now she says that in fact she had last seen her on Sunday evening. Essentially, she takes back her words. There was no Monday morning encounter after all. And at that very same time, city surveillance cameras capture Stefan driving the vehicle with Mallory in the passenger seat. And he's far from the school, he doesn't drop her off at the entrance, and after that moment, she simply vanishes. So what's really going on here? Another detail is intriguing and chilling. Behind the wheel together with Madeline, she's recorded in absolutely the same position. She's frozen in a very strange pose. The seat back is reclined far back, and from the outside it looks as if she's sleeping. That's exactly what Stefan would later claim. She was just sleeping. And then events take an even more suspicious turn. He pulls up next to a public dumpster to throw something away. And as would later be revealed, when that container was inspected, they discovered a backpack containing a pair of white Crocs. But what sense does that make if you're taking someone to school? Why dispose of her belongings? According to investigators, events unfolded differently. Stefan had done the irreparable to Madeline back on Sunday evening. On Monday morning, he moved what remained of her into the car and drove around with her. It's perfectly obvious he had no plans to drop her off at school. After driving around like this for 2 hours, he pulls into a parking lot. According to case materials, there is footage showing him transferring a motionless burden from the passenger seat into the trunk. After that, he returns home with this load, and he still has an entire hour of time left. Up to this point, no one was taking the situation seriously. While Madeline's mother stays home, Stefan once again leaves the residence to relocate what remained elsewhere. By all appearances, he was heading somewhere to, in quotes, dispose of the main piece of evidence and any final traces of the investigation. He drives in a particular direction, but at some point he gets a flat tire. What's important here is that he stubbornly keeps driving on the flat tire until literally nothing is left of it but the lug nuts. I mean, a normal person in a stressful situation, if their tire breaks down, of course they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't keep driving on it, but a person who has urgency, who has some kind of anxiety, who definitely has stress, of course they're going to keep driving on a flat tire and through every other problem there is, because right now that's not a problem at all compared to what's lying in the car, and he leaves what would later be discovered right where he ended up at that moment, changes the tire, and returns home. This is exactly what the police suspect him of. They still don't know what happened, so 2,654, as it later turns out, was captured by surveillance cameras. Now investigators only need to locate the place of concealment. You know, as soon as they gain access to his phone, irrefutable evidence is found that he had subjected Madeline to inappropriate conduct. And most likely this nightmare had been going on ever since she turned 8 years old. Now a whole series of questions arises. How much did Jennifer know about everything? And what was Stefan doing on the night Maddie went missing? On Monday evening. After all, the police were combing the area searching for the teenager, while Jennifer is sitting at home because she wants to protect her mental health. And Stefan goes out in the middle of it. The police must be wondering whether he's returning to that very location at that moment. What was he actually doing with her that night? 62 days when Jennifer and Stefan are living in a hotel, they were removed from the home because the police had cordoned it off for investigative procedures, and Stefan is again spotted slipping away in secret. In the middle of the night, he takes Jennifer's car to once again go looking for Madeline. where he actually went, whether it has any connection to the place where he might have hidden the young girl, both in the interrogation room and throughout the entire subsequent process. And later, a recording will surface in the case that moves everything forward. Listening to the interrogation transcripts, it's hard to remain indifferent. What Stefan describes provokes an immediate sense of inner revulsion. According to his version of events, she brought joy into the home. She was a bright and kind person. He assures investigators that Maddie was glowing with happiness and was literally counting down the days until his arrival, dreaming of the moment when they would all finally become one family. She was, in his words, truly happy. It's important to understand, these words are being spoken by a man in whose presence Madeline felt extremely uncomfortable. She always told her school counselor about this, and in reality, she couldn't stand him. And when detectives begin breaking down the morning when he supposedly dropped her off at school, his story completely loses its logic. There is no consistency in his testimony. At one point, they ask him directly, "Listen, do you have memory problems since you can't remember anything? First you say you dropped her off and at 9:20 you were waiting for the store to open. But you also claim you only waited a couple of minutes, and when you left it was already past 10 a.m. So was it a couple of minutes or 40? What is actually going on?" That's a direct quote. And in response, Stefan starts rolling out a classic set of excuses. He has a severe form of ADHD, so any time-related details get jumbled in his head. According to him, the times he gives are only approximate guesses because he didn't have a phone. And in his parents' car, he supposedly couldn't find a clock, and __4__, he makes excuses, admitting that his confusion isn't helping the case at all. But the strangest part comes even later, and this is where his confidence completely vanishes. He starts stumbling, hiding behind phrases like, "I don't recall," "maybe," "I can't," "I'm so sorry." This sudden helplessness in the details looks like a consequence of his diagnosis, like a deliberate attempt to conceal what actually happened. At 7:40 p.m., he left the house and never made contact again. "I'm on medication. I've been taking it for a week now. So my memory right now is far from reliable. That morning, I was in a fog and hadn't really woken up, and even when he gets the times mixed up, he just brushes it off. Sorry, I'm not a morning person." At one point, they ask him to roll up his sleeves so the officers can examine the scars that, according to him, he got while changing a tire. And then they ask, "Would you mind taking off your sweater?" It's cold, of course, but yes, no problem. It sounds strange. We know this from the audio recordings. Approximately 48 hours after the disappearance, he's finally brought to the police station. And there he sits for 3.5 hours with a sour expression. He looks extremely tense, which seems logical, but when the officer walks in, he starts performing the mouth of a person who has just awakened from sleep. He sits there with his legs and arms crossed, demonstrating how cold he is, and it gives the impression that he's trying his hardest to appear sleepy, harmless. "I just dozed off. Now I'm trying to gather my thoughts." But this ridiculous combination, it's just absurd. He sits there with an absolutely impassive face and once again walks the officers through Sunday's events. "You know, Jennifer sent me, and I'm quoting here, and Maddie upstairs to sleep. So we had time for cuddles and tenderness." Then the officer asks again, "You said, time for tenderness? Here, well, they're already asking really direct, specific questions. Maddie doesn't like being alone. She's extremely dependent." That's how he explains it. She can't tolerate being alone at all. She constantly needs someone to be next to her. "I see. And what's your relationship with Maddie like?" He answers, "Wonderful. I'm one of her most beloved people in the world. And you know, we tried to wean her off of that." These are now his direct statements, off this strong dependency, but it wasn't easy. And both officers, two detectives, look as if they can barely restrain themselves from punching him in the face. Because it's obvious that it sounds, well, you can just bleep it out. And at this moment, they already have the data from his phone and the camera footage in their hands. They've already seen everything on CCTV, and this guy is still trying to play the fool, and everything was adding up except for one thing. He claims that Madeline was his most beloved person in the whole world, and she constantly required this time for cuddles. But even if we allow that to be true, such displays of closeness look absolutely unbearable. They don't fit in any sane mental framework whatsoever. So when the police ask him to reconstruct a minute-by-minute chronology of that morning, Stefan simply yawns in response. He casually talks about how she needed to brush her teeth and comb her hair. It's hard to say definitively whether he's trying to appear so innocent that he's imitating a complete absence of nervousness, or whether he's actually just relaxed because he doesn't see anything wrong in his actions. And it's possible he's just stalling for time, under unbearable stress, but it looks bizarre. And he feeds the investigation his version of Monday's events. They try to catch him in his own words, pointing out the obvious inconsistencies, and yet they don't dwell on that moment for long, because right now they're concerned less with the morning and more with the central question, where is she? And by the way, they ask, how old are you? He's 37, nearly 38. You seem like a sincere person. I try to be. And here's the important part. This was literally a scene straight out of the interrogation. It's important to understand that Jennifer thought very highly of him. And Stefan simply nods compliantly, accepting it as something self-evident. Then they ask a question that shifts the tone of the conversation. You said that on Monday you were driving toward the school. But how is it that on the cameras we see you driving back toward that house again? Oh right, I forgot the gate remote. You see, according to him, he had left with Madeline. The school was about 20 minutes away. They had almost arrived, and suddenly he realizes he forgot the gate remote. He turns around and drives back, arguing that, quote, there was plenty of time to spare. This sounds strange, too. A remote, just to get back in. So you had already driven off, and then you decided to turn around. The police ask, couldn't you have just picked up the remote after dropping her off? He says, I could have, but I sometimes like to come in through the back gate, and there are lines at the front, so it's better to avoid them. And whether or not that sounds logical, that's exactly what I did, and then they finally back him into a corner. Okay, but there's footage where you're talking to security while Madeline is sitting in the front seat in a semi-reclined position. You claim she's sleeping, but we don't buy it. And then you walk over to the trash bin and throw something away, basically looking for a fool here. Why? And the phone was sitting on the nightstand. That was strange. The detectives ask him the question that should have put a period at the end of this part of the story. Why did her backpack end up in the trash bin if, by his own assurances, he simply dropped her off at the gate? He just blinks rapidly, staring at them in total bewilderment, as if the very idea of that discovery seems to him something in the realm of the impossible. And at this moment, the investigators make an attempt to reach what he calls his soul. They tell him, Stefan, I'm begging you, look inside yourself. The more time passes, the heavier the consequences become. But the answer comes out dry. I dropped her off. As would later become clear, that was the last thing he was willing to admit. When asked about the contents of the phone, he answered almost eagerly, listing photos of collectible cards, lightsabers, and shots from Disneyland. When the conversation turned to cloud storage and automatic synchronization, Stefan confirmed that backups had most likely been running in the background, and according to his version, when the system was updated and reset, it was the device's local memory. What matters is that at this point, the detectives no longer intended to play his games. They reminded him about the selfie from the train and the footage from Puerto Rico, where he had bright red hair. The tone of the conversation changed for good when the investigators stated directly, "We have the phone. You're an intelligent man and you understand perfectly well what we saw, claiming that you have no idea about the contents of your own smartphone." And at some point, he seemed to sense that the situation was slipping out of his control. Sherishin asked whether it wasn't time for him to speak to an attorney. The answer was clear. The goal of the police is to find the one whose whereabouts are unknown, and whether he is willing to take part in that is his personal choice. And this is where the performance is truly over. We'll arrange it, but you should know, you cannot leave, you are being detained. And if you look at the situation from the outside, a logical question arises. How does an innocent person behave in a moment like this? Normally, people demand explanations, get indignant, ask about the reasons. But Stefan only tossed out curtly, "Fine." And even when the official grounds were stated, inflicting severe harm and possession of prohibited materials involving minors, he didn't utter a word in his own defense. Just, "Okay." And that unsettling submissiveness somehow caused everything to finally collapse, leaving a heavy impression. Because of the nature of the materials that had been discovered earlier, investigators needed to find one very specific detail, a distinctive marking on his intimate areas. What's important here is that many of the existing images captured Madeline and fragments of Stefan, irrefutable confirmation that it was him in those photos. And at some point, two female officers walk into the room and begin processing him without any ceremony. They literally rotate him, photographing every angle, make him turn, remove his clothing, and document on camera everything that's usually concealed. And honestly, I don't think they pay enough for that kind of work. He feels extraordinarily uncomfortable. And though this is only a negligible fraction of what she felt, at least it's something. And these two women come in and start operating with maximum severity. He's uncomfortable, but they carry out their work with incredible thoroughness. They aren't the type to say, "Oh, are you cold? Maybe a couple of shots is enough?" No. Their commands sound clinical. "Pull here, move this, do it like that. Come up with something to do, otherwise you'll be studying the texture of the carpet, and we'll just press you into the floor." It's harsh, especially coming from women. But even in such a situation, Stefan finds grains of narcissism in the depths of his dark soul. He asks if the handcuffs can be refastened in front, complaining about pain and claustrophobia. The officer simply responds that these restraints weren't designed for comfort, as in, "What do you want me to remove?" to accommodate him, which she wasn't about to do. But essentially, the interrogation at this point still wasn't yielding results. They needed to find Maddie. And if Stefan didn't want to help, then perhaps later on a recording would emerge in the case that would move things forward. And now we're talking about Jennifer's own behavior. If you watch the first part, then it's likely obvious to you. This woman absolutely does not strive to cooperate with the investigation. It seems that what throws her off far more is the very fact of Stefan's arrest and his betrayal. I use this word carefully because in context we're talking about things far heavier than mere infidelity. After all, her husband's fate concerns her more than her own daughter's disappearance, especially since it's most likely her husband's fault. And her state of shock manifests in precisely this way, but from the outside it looks extremely strange. Stefan is literally her entire world. She learns about the memory coin and begins to realize what exactly Stefan was doing to her loved one, to her daughter. Her first question pertains exclusively to him. Will he be arrested because of those photographs? And the officers respond that the decision hasn't been made yet. And at this moment she's sincerely puzzled. She wonders, doesn't the law require charges to be filed automatically when minors are involved? She thought about these rules and believed it was entirely within the power of the police. When she's then asked what, in her opinion, should happen to Stefan, Jennifer delivers something inexplicable. She calls the situation insanity, says she saw the photographs but still refuses to believe it. Yes, certain anatomical details are visible there, but is it definitely Stefan? Does she see it in the images? And this happens with her too. Look how Because when we've been worked over really well, we're no longer ready to come to terms with accepting a completely new, sharp reality that differs from the former one we'd grown accustomed to. Yes, and a person doesn't want to admit that they made a mistake there, that, crudely speaking, all of this happened because of them. But as a matter of fact, she's still a mother, after all. In such a situation this is called a self-defense system. On the other hand, of course, we can't push her too hard either because she is most likely an unstable person herself. I mean, the fact that she chose someone like that in her circle, I think his everyday phrases and behaviors carried some hidden meanings beneath it all, and surely all of it could be sensed. And since she went along with it, well, just look. She's easily led, and on top of that, she justifies herself by saying she hasn't seen all the materials, so she can't give a definitive answer. And the officer now asks her directly whether it matters whose photos those are. Is it normal to you that he even keeps such images on his phone? Good job by the officers. Are you ready to accept that? And only then does she say, of course not, by no means. So she does still have some common sense. As for the question about consequences for Stefan, she clearly has no appetite for it, but she's afraid to utter the words about pressing charges. She wants to believe in his innocence. In other words, this is a person who isn't ready to change her opinion. Well, this is more of a psychological trauma, really, because when you present them with arguments and facts, no, just no, no. I mean, we see this as the whim of a child who believed in some kind of fairy tale, who thought, well, that's it. Now it'll definitely be this way. All of us have been through this. To one degree or another, we all live through it. Then our world breaks apart. And if we understand and accept it correctly, we move on with this new information and build our life further. But a psychologically unstable person isn't ready to change reality. First of all, he isn't ready to change his life, to change the lifestyle he has in his head. He isn't ready to go through with it. He needs help, support, reassurance that everything will be okay, but that he needs to build a new, good, beautiful, healthy world. Yet this person doesn't understand that the healthy thing is over there, and what's here is unhealthy, because he was certain that what was here was the healthy part, and everything around it didn't concern him at all. That cocoon, the kind cults create, and if you live with a narcissist, this is exactly what they build for you, convincing you that anything outside of me doesn't concern you, and what's right here, well, I'll just believe in this fairy tale. It's easier to believe, as they say cheaper, to imagine that nothing ever happened. And at some point, she does, of course, acknowledge the fact that there is no one else her daughter can be left alone with. And in the police reports, Stefan simply went and took a family heirloom, a gold Rolex watch, from his own mother. Later in the case, testimony will appear in which she directly states the act he committed. This is important because when we analyze Jennifer's behavior throughout the numerous interrogations, she has not a single kind word for Maddie, yet she forces herself to say neutral or even pleasant things about the man who for years carried out such actions against her own flesh and blood, to put it in plain terms. And it must be noted that throughout the entire investigation, the mother only once mentioned, in passing, Maddie's creative nature, and by all appearances, Jennifer was consciously focusing on the negative. And from this moment, it's clear that even his own parents, even before this tragedy, had warned that Stefan was unhinged, a manipulator, and a master of gaslighting. And by the way, these are symptoms of a narcissist, of narcissism, when you're forced to believe that everything around you is bad, and only this is right. Jennifer continues to defend him, meaning a person who, well, cannot, he's fully, roughly speaking, inside the cult of the man he's involved with. He's not ready to believe in another life. At the same time, Maddie, who is nothing more than his victim, remains in her mother's eyes only forgetful. And just as with everything else, when the topic turns to Maddie, the first thing Jennifer recalls is the mess in her room, things scattered everywhere. I mean, your child is missing, right? And you're thinking about the bad stuff. Is that even normal? And she mentions ADHD, absent-mindedness, the fact that Maddie was constantly held back at school. Even the habit of sleeping in a particular way is presented by her mother with disdain. She says Maddie slept like a little monkey, and there's more of this kind of thing further on. After Stefan was taken into custody, detectives asked Jennifer about his relationship with her. She answered that everything was just wonderful. According to her, he was always kind and sweet, showing patience because of her diagnosis. The mother called Maddie a little abnormal, said she didn't behave like her peers. These words were spoken after what had already happened became known. A loving person would have said something completely different. Maddie's former stepfather remembers her as a brilliant and intelligent teenager. She adored the combination of green and lavender, and those around her always noted her calm demeanor. He was the one she was closest to, despite the distance. And Stefan was never her official relative. They weren't even married, you understand? I mean, generally speaking, for a person who already had no stop button, he had absolutely no stop buttons under the law either. And just recently, Maddie had been named Student of the Week, to dissolve in this process. A true Swiftie. She adored Taylor Swift. She wove beaded bracelets and drew beautifully, but her true competitive spirit came out on the volleyball court. In everyday life, she got along with everyone. Her biological father recalls that whenever he made a sharp remark about someone, Maddie would immediately correct him, reminding him that every person is beautiful. And at the memorial service, her stepmother called Maddie the light of her life. The stepmother. Not the mother, but the stepmother. She will be remembered as the girl who ran through pumpkin patches, learned to fish, and fed the animals on the farm. And it's hard to accept that all of this has come to an end. One of the people who helped organize the ceremony said, "Maddie matters to an enormous number of people all over the world." And this support knows no borders. But instead of these warm words, Maddie's mother prefers to dwell on her supposed shortcomings, because she, unfortunately, is locked inside her own mindset and her devotion to her unworthy partner. And the timeline added up, except for one small detail. On March 1st, just a few days after Maddie's disappearance, Jennifer once again found herself at the police station. By this point, the discovery had not yet been made, but Stefan was already under arrest for possession of prohibited materials, and the detectives spoke plainly. They simply wanted to find what was left of her 13-year-old daughter, hoping for a favorable outcome. And she, in their opinion, showed no interest whatsoever in helping the investigation. At the same time, the police held a press conference, calling on witnesses to come forward. And then a call came in from a man named Thomas. He had seen the silver Lincoln on Monday morning, and although he didn't remember the license plate, he was ready to point out the exact location. The detective at first considered the information too vague, but Thomas didn't give up. He returned to that road, took photographs, and insisted that the man in the car really had been changing a tire. Thomas had been driving along a 2-lane road through the fields not far from the lake. He saw a silver Lincoln parked there, and a man in a cap fiddling with a wheel. And at one point their eyes met, and Thomas was certain it was Stefan. And thanks to the witness's persistence, an hour after his second call on March 1st, 2024, in a thicket of bamboo, she was found. She was lying there in a fetal position. She was wearing that same green hoodie and jeans. According to the investigation's theory, Stefan had been transporting her to the lake to dispose of the evidence, but because of the flat tire, he was forced to leave the remains in the bushes. And the cause of the fatal outcome was strangulation. A wave rose up online claiming that Jennifer had received what's called derivative immunity. This doesn't mean she's completely absolved of responsibility. It's a legal technicality, meaning that her own statements cannot be used against her directly. However, if police find independent evidence, the case will move to a new stage. On her phone, they also found strange messages sent shortly before the tragedy to her ex-husband. __, quote _1, ___. It's an overly specific concern, and later she tried to explain it by referencing the news about a camera in an airplane restroom. Even more questions arise from the correspondence where Jennifer writes, "Maddie won't be sleeping with me anymore. I can't take that risk." And what exactly was behind those words? If not with her mother, then with whom? Meanwhile, Jennifer assured police that the 13-year-old always slept only with her, and of course, users now suspect the mother and want to expose her. Jennifer continues to defend him, calling him a significant person, and she still wonders how such a pleasant guy could be involved in something like this. And the most frightening piece of evidence is a message from December 2023. She sent it to Stefan, the one that parents usually use to decide whose turn it is to handle the lullaby at night. On the coin it said, "Dad's turn" and "Mom's turn." So she added, "We need this. Buy this for us." Investigators believe that Stefan and the 13-year-old were discussing conception. It's possible that this very circumstance became the motive for the fatal incident, when Stefan realized that control over the situation was slipping away. Now he's awaiting trial, complaining in letters to his parents about poor mattresses and a lack of coffee, while the entire community is hoping for the harshest possible punishment. I think I've given comments in various places, and my position on this is clear. What I want to say is, please, study the behavior of narcissists. Any woman could end up in a situation like this because we weren't taught this in school. We didn't go over psychological types, what kinds of behaviors exist. A person can have schizoid traits or hysterical traits. That is, if you see that next to you there's a person who oppresses you, but you can't quite figure out whether he's oppressing you or not. Now, first of all, there's artificial intelligence, and you can type in the phrases your spouse, boyfriend, just an acquaintance, or even a friend says to you, you understand. And you can identify narcissists by certain criteria. So to speak, to avoid a fatal mistake, to not waste time, to help yourself first and foremost. Guys, there are so many relationships right now with abuse, with gaslighting. Well, more often than not, of course, this involves a relationship with a narcissist. Absolutely any woman can fall for this. No one is immune, because people like this typically present themselves as the sweetest of sweethearts. As in, I'm such a good guy, I'm such a kind person. It's you who's the bad one, you understand? That's how everything gets turned around later. Like, I do this for you, and this, and this. I mean, in reality, this and this and this are just everyday tasks. But he twists it all as if it's something, wow, supernatural. He came home, and that's it. He's already amazing. You see, the manipulation is happening on a fundamental level. So, dear women and dear men too, please take care of your mental health so you don't slip into narcissism. And women, by the way, can also slip into narcissism, of course. It's just that lately this kind of male behavior has been surfacing much more often. With women, of course, it's the opposite. She blames the man for everything, like, I don't need you. And she usually has lots of admirers, suitors, and so on. Yes. So that also happens. A narcissistic woman, you have to watch out for that carefully too. Well, I'm a woman, it's hard for me to talk about this. A man should be telling his own story. But having read this story to you, I'm offering my commentary as a woman. If you enjoyed it, of course, leave likes, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, watch our videos. It's very important to us. Thank you for being with us, for watching this video to the very end. Until next time. Next.